Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy. This right here is the Quiet Carry Strand. This is a knife that was recently launched on Kickstarter by a company that had existed previously, Quiet Carry. One of their claims to fame was this little guy here, which is a very large, very murdery sort of knife, but they decided to do something a little bit more reasonable this time around. And I want to thank my buddy Mike for sending this guy along for review shortly after he got it from the Kickstarter. Beautiful thing. Let's do a size comparison here on your Quiet Carry Strand. This is not a huge knife, so you can see that size-wise, the Delica blade is just about in the same department here. Although the handle is a little bit smaller, which is nice. This right here is your Ontario Rat number 1. The Rat 2 is currently on loan. Right here, Garrett Bull Miura. Which is one heck of a knife. Another smaller sort of, I don't know if this qualifies as gentlemanly, but it's certainly a smaller sort of folder. And, oh, what the heck, your Spyderco. Here we go, Sleesh Bowie. So, that's the size of this little guy. And like I said, a lot of people know Quiet Carry mostly from this tiny one, and that is a little bit smaller on pretty much every dimension. You're going to note that there's no disassembly video for this guy, and that is because, unfortunately, a great deal of permanent thread locker was used, and this screw here actually prevented me from taking the knife down. That's disappointing, but that's life, sadly. So, anyways, let's go on ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this particular pocket knife. So on the good side, first off, the blade on this guy is nice and small. You come in at about 2.8 inches, which is a size that's going to be legal in a lot of places. There are a few places with 2.75 and lower laws and things like that, but this is going to be good to go. And frankly, it's a nice size. I like very much the blade size here. Maybe the full 3 is a little better, but either way, it works out nicely. And I appreciate that they made a smaller knife. So many early knives by makers tend to be huge, but this one isn't, so that's nice. Speaking of this blade, it's actually very nice. I like very much the swedge that they've put on this guy. It adds a nice little sort of touch to it, makes it look a little bit more futuristic, a little more designed, which is nice. I like that they put in a sharpening choil, and that is almost quite, it's almost large enough to cover the entire plunge grind. Needed to be a little bit bigger, but that's okay. The steel on this guy is D2 tool steel, and that's good to go, absolutely. And frankly, I even like that there's not all that much crazy crap on the blade. Yeah, it says Quiet Carry, but beyond that, there's nothing that much interesting. It's not billboarded. It's not, oh my God, huge everywhere written all over the blade. So I appreciate that very much. Next thing I want to comment on is the design language here, because it is a relatively nice and unique design. I mean, the entire knife is made out of these 2 chunks of titanium and a little backspacer here, and it gives it a very sort of rectangular effect, while still being very contoury. I like it very much, and this 4-hole pattern here, which interestingly shows up on different sides of the knife depending on which side of the knife you're looking at. Trust me, that makes more sense when you actually think about it, I guess, because it's on the bottom here and it's on the top. Anyways, but it's kind of become, it seems, a signature of the brand because they've got the same sort of effect on the little Quiet Carry, and frankly, that's a nice little signature. I appreciate very much when makers are willing to do subtle things that kind of provide continuity rather than doing something big and jackassy. That's kind of nice. So the design on this guy is nice. I also have to say I like very much the chamfering all around the blade here. The edges are rounded, and on the back particularly, it's nice and rounded. It's nice and smoothed off. This feels very nice in the hand for that. So that's nice. One thing I want to point out is, and I'm going to see if I can show you here, but yeah, there you go. You'll see here that the detent ball and the lockbar insert are actually the same thing. This uses this little ball here, pardon me, and the detent as the lock bar, as the lock face, basically. That's what's touching the edge of the blade here. And that's, in a lot of ways, nice. This is what Chris Reeve Knives does with the Umnums on, although I believe they're using a ceramic ball. but it's good in that there is absolutely zero lock stick. And it's good in that the detent ball is nice and big. And so, I don't know how well it'll age with steel on steel, but it does work nicely for Chris Reeve over there. So, it's something different. It's something interesting. They could have really played it safe and not done anything so interesting, but here they kind of went for it. So I appreciate that. And then finally, I got to say, this knife is very, very smooth. In the opening and in the deploying, it's remarkably smooth. There's a little friction here and there, and it'd probably be even better if I was able to clean it out and lubricate it, but I am impressed with the smoothness of this knife very much. So that's what's good on this guy. It's smooth. The detent ball is the lockbar insert. It's got this 4-hole design signature, which I like very much. It's got some nice chamfering. The design on the hole is nice. The blade is very nice, and the blade is also fairly small, which is going to make this legal in a lot of places. So let's talk about the grate. On the grate side for me is actually the Ergonomics, because this fits very, very nicely in my hand. Surprisingly so in a lot of ways. You can choke up a little bit, but for me the most comfortable grip absolutely is right here. Index finger here, thumb up here. And because of this nice big index finger dent, it's not really going anywhere in your hand, even though it's a relatively slippery thing. And with that, this clip actually drops right into this chunk of my finger here. And this really, even though I'm only kind of getting a 3.5 finger grip here, this guy's barely got much to go with. It feels great in my hand. Absolutely 100%. This is a nice knife to be using and to be cutting with. Like I said, you can choke up. You can, to an extent, do a pinch grip sort of affair, but it's really best suited to this grip, and it feels pretty damn good in the hand doing it that way. So that's what's great about this guy, is ergonomically speaking, at least for me with my relatively small hands, it does feel pretty nice. Let's talk about the bad. So on the bad side, first off, unfortunately, this has ambidextrous thumb studs, but there's not ambidextrous thumb stud access. At least for me, the thumb stud isn't quite prominent enough on this side that I can reliably get a good shot at it. I kind of can, but on the left side, it's just not doing, relative to the right side, where you've got a lot more cutout around it. So that's a little bit weird to me. Why they bothered to put ambidextrous thumb studs if they're not really giving you enough room to use them on this side. I would have preferred them to just use a one-sided thumb stud anyways. It's also only tapped for left hand, for right side tip up carry. Wow. Sorry about that. And so the ambi studs are nice, but don't make all that much sense to me. Next thing going on here is that this has a relatively long handle for a relatively small blade. There were lots of blades like that in the world, but this one is among them, certainly. I mean, the amount of blades you get here is not that impressive relative to the amount of handle. Part of that's because they're using this nice thick back spacer back here. And, it works in the hand, so I can't argue too much, but it is in that club of you put how much blade in that big body? Okay. There you go. Sharpening choil, like I said, kind of misses the plunge grind here. There's just a little bit of plunge that goes beyond it. That's why you get this little tiny protuberance over here. Not a big deal, though. Not really beating them up on that much. Something, we're starting to get into some bigger concerns here. First off, there is a fair amount of lock movement. With this knife locked up, you can really push this lock around, and it kind of skates all over the locked face. It doesn't feel insecure in any particular way, and, spine whack test-wise, it's just okay. I'm sorry, it's just fine. There's no issue there. But that amount of lock movement, especially because this part is pretty prominent, it means that as you bear down, you're moving all over the lock, and that's a little frightening, if nothing else. No blade play or anything like that, so, is it really a problem? No, but is it confidence inspiring? Also, that's going to be a no. Next thing, the blade on this guy is surprisingly thick. This is meant to be a small, gentlemanly sort of knife, and yet they've put a fairly thick chunk of blade on here. And it's also fairly thick behind the edge. If you look at the sharpening choil there, you can see that it pretty immediately balloons out to something that's relatively thick. I would have appreciated a much more slicing-friendly grind on this guy, as well as some thinner blade stock, if you're trying to make me a smaller, gentlemanly sort of knife. That's a little strange to me. The thumb studs are very, very much in the slicing path on this knife. I mean, you don't get a whole lot of blade, and the bottom, I don't know, quarter, half an inch is almost certainly going to snag in whatever you're cutting because of these thumb studs. Another reason why an ambidextrous thumb stud may not have been the best choice here. I understand that that's maybe what they needed to do for ergonomic reasons to get the thumb stud accessible, but it's always a little bit unpleasant for me when I see that. Then finally on the bad side is the price. You're looking at $129, and I gotta say, that's not unreasonable for the knife itself. You got like D2 steel here, you got titanium here, it's a nice grade of titanium. You've got a decent enough design, decent enough construction, all those sorts of things. They're a little bit vague about where this is built. I'd be much more sympathetic if this were made in the USA. I really don't think it is. In fact, I think it may be, well, I'm not going to speculate. The Loctite is very similar to what happens on some of Spyderco's work. But nonetheless, the 129 is okay as a price, but it puts it with some serious competition. And I'm not necessarily sure it competes so well. So that's the bad on this guy. The price is okay, but puts it with serious competition. Thumb studs are in the slice and path. The thumb studs are ambi, but there's no ambi access to them. Thick blade, fair amount of lock movement. Sharpening choil doesn't quite hit the entirety of the plunge, and it's got a pretty long handle for a small blade. Now let's talk about the ugly here. So on the ugly side, there are 3.5 things. The half thing is, looking at this logo here, my very first, I'll see if I can actually get it to photograph, my very first impression is, wait, why did Shirogorov make this? This logo, at a glance, is very similar to the Shirogorov knives logo. They've put some cheeks onto the bear or whatever, and it's not quite as pointy on the bottom, but yeah, it's, I love the Shiro logo too, but that doesn't mean I'm basing mine on, I don't know. Not a big deal, little nitpick. I'm sure that they're different enough to not cause legal problems, but they've got a really great logo here, a really great trademark sort of affair in this 4-dot pattern. I don't know why they needed to go with the fake Shiro logo. That was a little strange to me. Whatever, like I said, that's half an issue. Not a big deal. Bigger issues, this guy has stupid amounts of Loctite on it. Like I said, this was enough to actually prevent me from doing a disassembly in a knife where, you know, it's not only a frame lock, but also you've got this, you've got this construction where everything is very tightly nestled inside there. You're going to need to get in there and clean this guy out. That amount of permanent thread locker is a bad thing, and I really hope they work with the factory to dial that back. That's just no good. Next issue, unfortunately, this knife has very, very little detent on it. You know, it's enough that you can flick the knife open fairly reliably, although it's not hard for you to accidentally start the flick before you're ready to. But the detent pops open with just a little bit of motion here. So that means that this knife, well, I don't know. It's borderline scary, the relatively low detent on this guy. It's probably going to be okay, but if you bend the lockbar any further, you're going to have a bad time. Speaking of which, the lockbar tension on this guy is another thing that is borderline scary. It means that it's very easy to unlock this knife, but it's probably the reason why there's as much lock creep going on here, as well as why the detent is pretty light. Lockbar tension and detent are directly related to each other on a frame lock sort of knife, because the lockbar tension is pushing the detent ball into the detent ball hole and whatnot. But nonetheless, if this were to bend any further, and it very much could, the only over travel stop is the clip here, this could get actually dangerous. So that's a little bit ugly to me. Pardon me. The fact that the lockbar tension is so light, which leads to relatively lacking detent. And then on the other ugly front, it's got stupid amounts of Loctite, and the logo doesn't strike me as the most innovative or creative thing in the world, although it is certainly after a very neat logo. So there you go. That's the ugly here. Let's talk final conclusions. So on the final conclusion side, this has got a very nice design in a lot of ways. I mean, Quiet Carry seems to be building a very design-conscious sort of brand, and I appreciate that very much. Good industrial design is a good thing, Absolutely 100%. And they're doing some nice things with it. D2 is a good choice here. Titanium is nice, and I appreciate the bearing detent lock face. That's a little bit of really giving a damn and really trying hard. And couple that with the really good ergonomics on this knife, and it's clear that Quiet Carry is really trying to do something exceptional. They're not just doing an also-ran sort of brand. And so that's kind of nice. The thing is, though, this guy has got some early production knife issues. The lockbar detention and the detent issue is pretty ugly. I'll be honest there. And the Loctite absolutely needs to go. And so if you get one of these guys, check for Loctite and check the detent. Check to make sure that the lockbar tension's okay. This could just be a QC issue with this particular guy. This one came out of the factory a little bit wrong, and, the person making it drowned it in Loctite. But check for those things, and if not, do some warranty work on it. But nonetheless, there you go. The thing is, though, those are early issues, perhaps production issues, but even once they iron those out, the price on this guy puts it in some serious territory. Again, I'm not saying that the price here is unjustified. But for $129, you could buy a Spyderco Native 5, a Spyderco PM2. You could buy a Spyderco Delica in ZDP steel, a Spyderco Manix, a Dragonfly, and there are all kinds of other things that you can pick up in that price range that are really, really compelling, and not to mention things like the Ontario Rat 2, Ontario Rat 1. There were a ton of great knives available for $129, and I don't know. So, I'm curious where this company, Quiet Carry, is going to go in the future, and I think that this is a pretty decent early effort from them. If this is what they're kickstarting now, maybe in 5-10 years, they're going to be making incredibly compelling stuff. But honestly, this particular knife, I don't know. I feel like if you've got $129 in your pocket, although it's a fine knife and I like a lot of the design sides, this probably isn't where I would send you first. So there you go. If you're in love, then do it. Check for those issues. But if you're not seeing it immediately and deeply in lust with this knife, I'm going to go ahead and send you elsewhere. There are more reliable choices without some of those issues available in that same price range. So there you go. It's a Quiet Carry Strand, and I hope this has been interesting for you and that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.